and welcome to another in the series Talking with Dan Gibson. If you have questions that you'd like to ask after you see this video, please write me at dan@canbooks.ca. It's written on the bottom of your screen. So far, we've been talking about three different books. Books that I wrote over a period of time. This book, The Nabateans, was written back about 2003, 2004, about the Nabatean people, and it came out back then, written for not an academic audience, but a popular audience. That was followed by this book, Quranic Geography, and it covers the geography of the Quran, looking at the people of Ad, the people of Thamud, the Midianites, and so forth. And it introduces the idea that Mecca, the city of Mecca is in Saudi Arabia, is not the original founding city of Islam, but rather that all the Qiblas pointed to Petra. And a lot of people were very interested in that topic. And so that book was there. It was followed up by the film, which was called The Sacred City, and people asked for the information behind the film, and so that's when I produced this book, Early Islamic Qiblas. And this book looks in detail at the early Qiblas, and that whole information. Was the original founding city of Islam, was it the city of Petra, or was it the city of Mecca? And where was Muhammad born, and how do we know which one is which? So that's this book, 296 pages. It's a large format book in full color all the way through. Now this book was originally 8 academic papers written on an academic level, and so as we go through it, there are 8 different sections. The very first section is called Early Islamic Qiblas, and it contains a database of over 60 mosques from the first 250 years of Islam. I've traveled all over the world and tried to visit each of these mosques, and those I couldn't visit, I checked our archaeological, on all of them I've checked archaeological records, and sometimes I've had to ask somebody else, could you visit this mosque, and so forth, in order to get accurate GPS recordings, or at least visit the site and get the data that I need for each of these mosques. So there is a database of over 60 mosques, and I did not pick and choose the mosques. This is a list of all of the mosques that I could find, every last mosque from the first 200 years of Islam. I've been hunting for them, and perhaps you're aware of a new mosque. Please let me know. One of the challenges is, if they're not famous mosques, if they're rather, off in some corner somewhere, how do we know how to date the mosque? That is always a challenge. So I'm always interested in learning. If you know of a mosque in your area that dates back to the beginning of Islam, please write me, dan@canbooks.ca. I'd love to learn more about the mosque in your area. Now, you will discover in this book a chart, and I discover as I look at these 60 mosques that during the first 100 years of Islam, all of the mosques faced Petra in Jordan, not Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And so you will see this is a timeline, 1AH, it's starting, this is after the Hijrah, the first years of Islam, these are Islamic dates. Over 100 years, mosques pointed to Petra in Jordan. Then something that history doesn't tell us clearly, we have to go digging to find out what happened. But those first mosques, they are pointing to Petra with an extreme accuracy, less than 2.5 degrees in accuracy. That's the average accuracy. Some of them are within 1 degree of pointing at Petra. I mean, they're very, very accurate. Then we find 3 things that come. There are mosques that point to Petra, mosques that point between Petra and Mecca, and mosques that point parallel to a line drawn between Petra and Mecca. And so the Mecca mosques, they're actually very few at the beginning, starting 100 years. It's 109 years after the Hijrah when we find the very first mosque that we can say was originally built pointing to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And there's only 5 mosques that we can draw this data from. There are 8 mosques that point between these two, and they were all influenced by a man by the name of Hajjaj, General Hajjaj. And he influenced these. He refused to accept Petra. He refused to accept Mecca. And so he decided, I'm just going to point my mosques right in between the two. Very interesting. And then there are the parallel mosques, and these all come from North Africa and from Spain. So notice the accuracy of the mosques. This is a map of the area around Petra. Only 2 of the Qiblas lie outside of a 75-degree circle, which is 45 miles, or 75 kilometers around. 2 Qiblas are outside of that circle. Many of the Qiblas are less than 20 kilometers from Petra. And when you figure out that some of these are pointing from Iran and India and one from China and so forth, this is staggering that they are this accurate. And some are extremely accurate. And so for every mosque, when I have studied them, I've written them up, I present a chart for each mosque. Here's the chart for a mosque. And so we show on the left, starting on the left, the actual mosque points to 304 degrees. And so that's where that mosque points, from visiting the mosque and from taking accurate readings. The Petra is 304.06, so we're out by, that's the next column, 0.26 degrees, so it's very accurate. Mecca, however, is out by 75 degrees, and then Jerusalem is out by 1.65 degrees. I always try to include these others so you can see, well, where exactly is this pointing? These charts are done up for all 63 mosques in the book, explaining what's there, what's parallel, and so forth. Now when we get to the second section, we ask the question, what is the accuracy of Google Earth? Many people have asked me this. Oh, look at this map from Google Earth. How accurate is this? Well, first of all, people who read this are assuming I use Google Earth for the measurements. It's not true. I use Google Earth to confirm the consistency of my measurements. I use Google Earth to illustrate, chart, and map the things that we're doing. But Google Earth is not what I based this research on. Google Earth has problems, and we talk about this in the second section. For instance, the screen resolution. If you're using a small window from a cell phone, or if you're using a big one, the screen resolution changes. Every time you zoom in, the resolution changes. Every time you move over, you start changing maps because Google Earth is made up of one map overlapping another map and so forth. So real challenges because they took round maps, square maps, and they put them on a round surface. And so some have to be shrunk, and some have to be twisted, and some have to be overlapped and fit together and so forth. So Google Earth is not the best way to do the research. It's not very accurate. Rather, I preferred to use the Japanese Advanced Thermal Emission and Reflection Radiometer, or ASTER as it's called. The entire Earth is mapped by the ASTER satellite every 2 to 3 days. It takes a stream, a photo that is a long stream. As it's going along, it's just taking pictures of the Earth. It takes 260,000 photos every 2 days. And the reference points are just 96 or 98 feet apart. And so it's very accurate, and you need to ask for permission and explain why you want to use their data, and then they give you permission, and then you have access to this data. It's a much more accurate picture that's been taken of the Earth and of the entire surface of the Earth. And so that is the data I would use to double check the measurements that were taken on the ground. Or in the rare case where I couldn't visit a mosque because it's in the middle of a current battle or something is going on there, then I have resorted to using ASTER and taking measurements from that. But that's very rare that I do that. I prefer that someone actually visit the site and take a GPS and check the data as well on the ground. Section 3 talks about obtaining Qibla calculations when you visit someone. How do I measure when I'm on the ground? When I visit a mosque, what do I do? And so I talk about, I get maps of the area. I get the archaeological reports of the area. I then establish points for the calculation, and you have to set up these different waypoints. And then I measure the GPS. From outside the building, perhaps inside the building. If the building's still standing, you have to use the outside of it. And so you need to go in and find out, where was the Qibla wall? Some of the earliest buildings do not have a mihrab or a niche on it. So you need to go in and find out which wall is the Qibla wall. And then outside the building, then you can take your measurements, or if the building is just a set of ruins, then you can do them right inside because there is no ceiling above you. And then measure that with other things, and take all these measurements and put them together. And if I need to, I use parallel measurements. When I was in China, there is a roof on that building. So when I came out and took the measurement on the wall, I noticed that they had huge cement square tiles, a whole courtyard out there. And I realized I could just go over 2 or 3 lines and I get a straight shot up to the sky with the satellites, and then I could take a measurement down that line and get that exact measurement. Now that I can see from space. Looking down this building, I could see the building. I could line up the building, but it had overhangs of the roof on it because it's a Chinese structure. But I could measure these lines outside and realize these lines run exactly parallel to this side wall, and I could do my measurements that way. But you've got to visit. You've got to look at the building. You have to decide, how do I know that this is the Qibla wall, and how do I get the right measurement? Don't use a screen. If you have to use a screen, if you want to double check and use a screen, when you go to the screen and you're looking at something and you see a building, imagine this is a building here, and this is the Qibla wall. What I would do is I would take a line in Google, you can do this in Google Earth if you want, draw a line parallel to this, a much larger line that is exactly parallel to this end, because it's so easy to get them off. So get a line that's parallel, and then on your screen, take something, maybe a white piece of paper, and put it over here on that line so it follows it, and then draw a line this way, and then look at the measuring tool that's there and get the exact degrees, and then pop that line, that degree, and now you can check which way the Qibla goes. So